Well, hello there, everybody. Glad to be with you all here. We're going to have yet another great late night chat, just like we always do. So, welcome. Say hello. I'm here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. We're going to have yet another amazing conversation.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. Burby, 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 burby. I think on the Muppets, there was like a chef who talked that way. And I just thought it was a very funny way of talking. And apparently it's supposed to be some kind of racist caricature of a Swedish chef. It's supposed to be like the Swedish language. I never got that when I was a kid. I just thought it was a funny way he was talking. But apparently that's offensive. So if there are any Swedes watching, I do apologize. Didn't mean to offend you there. I never thought that Swedish people sounded that way. I just thought that was the funny way that the chef on the Muppets would talk. But apparently that is intended to be some kind of racist caricature of a classical Swedish chef. It didn't occur to me. I just thought it was a strange way of talking. But anyway, when I was a kid, they had the Sesame Street show for kids, but I guess the Muppet Show was like a 1970s thing. And that was a pretty strange bit of television. I think I saw like some reruns of that, and that was some strange television. Indeed, it was a little odd, right? It was kind of like a variety show. They would have like dance numbers with Kermit the Frog or something. It's very, very strange. But anyway, welcome. Glad that you're here tonight. Glad that you all are here. We're going to do yet another one of our great late night conversations. Now, the way that these conversations work is first I give my opening remarks. My opening remarks are then followed by the roll call. And then after that, I answer your questions for the remainder of the show. So if there's something you would like me to talk about in the second half of the program, all you need to do is send me a Rumble rant. If you're on Rumble, send me a Cash App at CalebMoppin22. But the best way, the absolute best way to send your questions is buy me a coffee. Buy me a coffee. Great way to send your questions. Very, very much appreciated if you do it that way. And also, it's been noted, you don't have to do it while the show is live. Buy me a coffee is open 24 hours a day. 24 hours a day. So you can do it. You can do it when I am not live, like Kate did. Kate Johnson sent me 2 questions earlier today, and so I will answer them, and I do appreciate it. I will answer them, and I think Talking Mark's Markets, no, he didn't send one, right? But Kate Johnson sent me 2 from today. So I will make a point of answering them because they came in. You don't have to send them while I'm live. That's one of the beauties of Buy Me a Coffee. So if you're watching this tomorrow or the next day or whatever, you can send your questions then, and I will make a point of answering them. Buy Me a Coffee is the best way to send questions, whatever it is you want me to talk about. It's a great way to send questions for the second half of the show. We do the roll call, and then we do me answering questions for the remainder of the show. Now, before we open up the show with the opening remarks and all of that, the constant announcement is that we are the Center for Political Innovation. We are an organization that's doing all kinds of amazing work all over the country. Join the Center for Political Innovation. And if you want to come to a nice event at the beginning of next year, January 11th, come out to New Jersey for our event that we're having called The Earth is Awakening, America Should Join. It's going to be a lovely, lovely event near the Newark airport. We have a nice hotel. There'll be a full buffet. People will be able to eat the buffet. Music, a musician friend of mine is going to come and perform, speeches, long Q&A session. It's going to be a tremendous, tremendous event out there in New Jersey. We're going to give awards to some local New Jersey activists that I have looked up to for a long time. So register. We've already got a number of people signed up to be there. I'm looking forward to seeing the people that are registering. We got people from around the country that are coming into town. I was talking to some quite prominent people might be there. Some important academics might be there, which I'm looking forward to that. Shout out if they're watching, you know who you are. And some CPI leadership from around the country is definitely going to be there. The CPI board is all coming to town, and it's going to be a great day to kick off the new year, January 11th. In New Jersey, near the Newark airport. So if you register, we will send you the address. Obviously, we're not just giving that out to anybody for security reasons. Security is always a concern. We have to be careful. We have to be careful at these kinds of events, but it's going to be a great event. It really will be a great event. So come to our event in New Jersey. Come meet the Center for Political Innovation. Find out what we're all about. Get plugged into our operations. Look, I'm very excited. We have gotten 5 new memberships in CPI in just the last 3 days. I am overjoyed. Our membership ranks are expanding, and that's great. We've got our Saturday membership meeting. If you join CPI, the way it works is you join on the website, and then you get added to the email list. Then we have the Saturday membership meeting. Once you come to a Saturday membership meeting and prove that you are a real person, at that point, we then will add you to the internal communications and plug you in with local people. There's layers to these things. Some people who join CPI, all they want to do is pay dues. They just want to be supporters. That's fine. We appreciate the support. But those who want to be involved, come to a members meeting. That's the way to be involved. If you've signed up and you haven't gotten an email, check your spam folder. Make sure you can always reach out to me, if you signed up and for some reason you haven't gotten anything. But, if you want to get involved, the email goes out once a week for those who've joined on the website. And we always have a nice Saturday meeting. It's always a great meeting of CPI that we have. It's always a weekly check-in. And then Wednesday night, active members, we do like an active members check-in on Wednesday evenings as well. That's why my streams on Wednesday are always a little bit later, because we have our weekly members check-in. We're just a good community of people, and we're doing real operations. CPI LA is out in the streets saying hands off Venezuela, handing out palm cards and leaflets. And Chicago, they're going to food banks and doing outreach there. And Penny in Minneapolis and her crew, they're getting together. They're having a reading group around the Khrushchevism book, right? We're having the campaign around our Khrushchevism book about, Khrushchevism and the psychological operations. They're having a meeting of that tomorrow, a local meetup to discuss the Khrushchevism book. And they're doing those meetups out in LA. And we just got an organization that's doing real shit. We're a real organization of people that are connected to each other, people who know each other. Noah was just in Russia for Intervision, representing us at the International Songwriting Competition put on by Russia. And, I was just in Moscow for the gala that was there, got to see the Russian president once again. That was pretty cool. We're doing great stuff. We really, really are. We're the real deal, and we disrupted the No Kings rallies. Hands off Venezuela. We're going to food banks around the country to hand out palm cards to people. Very, very important. Talking about why it is that food stamps have been cut off and what this crisis is really about. We're doing real shit, and you should get involved. You should join our organization. This stream is not meant to be passive entertainment. I'm sure you can find somebody else who's much more entertaining if that's what you're looking for. We're here to carry out real operations and build a real anti-imperialist movement. And I would like to plug you in to be involved. And so become a member of CPI. Come to our event in New Jersey on January 11th. You can go to the Eventbrite and register. It's going to be good. It's going to be great. And, we have a lot of allies, people in the Uhuru movement that we've stood with against FBI repression and, the religious community we've been friendly with, working around peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. And I mean, it's just, we have real alliances and real friends. We're getting real stuff done. So yeah, that's my general pitch for CPI. But as I said, tonight is just yet another late night conversation, just like we always do. So if you would like to ask a question, you can send questions via Rumble Rants, Caleb Moppin 22 on the Cash App. But the best way, the absolute best way to send a question is buy me a coffee. Boom, 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 right? You send the question, you buy me a coffee. It's great. And we've already got 2 questions to start us out already, because you don't have to send them while I'm live. You can send them afterwards, beforehand, whatever you want to do. So send your questions. Keep the ball rolling, as they say. Good to be with you all tonight. So I guess we'll just get right into it. The U.S. federal government is shut down. And this is the longest shutdown in American history. U.S. government shutdowns didn't happen until the 90s. And it started out with Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich had his contract for America, and he did not approve of Bill Clinton, and he wanted cuts in public spending. And so he had Congress not approve the budget, and they shut down the federal government. And that happened during the Clinton years. And then during the Obama administration, they did a similar thing. And it was, again, Republicans, conservatives, demanding austerity, cuts in public spending. Now, what's unique is that this is during the Trump administration. This is a Republican president, and it's Democrats that are keeping the government shut down. Now, according to the Trump administration, the issue at hand is that they will not approve a budget that includes health care benefits for undocumented immigrants and transgender surgery for minors. That's what they say the issue is. Now, Democrats contest that. They say that's not what the issue is. The White House is blaming the shutdown on the Democrats. The Democrats are blaming the shutdown on Trump. And I'm actually here to tell you, I hate to say this. This is actually, I try to be optimistic. This is bad news. This is bad news. But sometimes you just got to be real. You just got to tell it like it is. I think that the government is shut down right now because this is something that both sides view as a win. And that is awful. How is this is absolutely disastrous. Low-income families don't have food assistance. Food banks are overwhelmed. Public employees are not getting paid. There is chaos at the airports right now because air traffic controllers are not getting paid and are not available. This is an absolute disaster. But both sides view it as politically beneficial. And because of that, it's continuing. And what kind of situation do we have where both sides think it is in their interest to have the federal government be shut down and basic government functions halt? I mean, but why is that? Well, first of all, this is to the benefit of the Democrats because they want Trump to be unpopular. And Trump is the president of the country, and the federal government is shut down, and their message is, see how shitty of a job Trump is doing. And Trump's approval ratings are already very low. He's doing very poorly in his first year of his second term as president. And it looks like the Democrats are saying, let's drag this out so that everyone gets the memo that Donald Trump sucks. That's why they view it as beneficial. Republicans, however, also view this as beneficial. Why? Well, Republicans generally are the ones wanting to cut all the government programs that right now are frozen, like food stamps, right? It was all over social media. Oh, all these people, the 42 million people on food stamps all need to get a job. Well, most of them have jobs. 70% of them have jobs. A large number of them are children. But, they're the ones saying that there should be no food stamps and all the people getting food stamps are lazy. And they're the ones constantly wanting to cut the wages and jobs of public employees. You had the DOGE, right? The Department of Government Efficiency that was cutting and laying off public workers in big numbers. And, so The Republicans view this as beneficial because they want all these people to not be paid and not have jobs to begin with. Having the government shut down is, it's a way that these people are not paid. And they start to make the argument, see, all these people didn't get their food stamps and there wasn't riots. All these government employees didn't get paid and the economy, the mail kept getting delivered. So they're using this to push an austerity agenda. The Democrats are using this to push a Trump sucks agenda. And I think both sides view this crisis as to their political benefit, which is disastrous. How does that make sense? If something is to the benefit of one side, it should be at the expense of the other. And if something is at the benefit, at the loss of one side, it should be the benefit of the other. But right now, both sides are viewing what is a disaster for the country as politically beneficial. And that's why they're not solving it, right? They both think that they're winning. Democrats think, wow, everyone hates Trump. We'll keep the government shut down and watch Trump's approval ratings go down. Republicans are saying, wow, we're making the case that we don't need to fund government services and that's why this is continuing. Now, obviously, it's going to get to the point that one side says, all right, this isn't beneficial to us, and, turns the government back on and they reach a compromise. It's never taken this long before. And that underlying this is what I have told you all is underlying a lot of this, which is that Trump is viewed as a Bonapartist. He's viewed as somebody who is working in his own interest rather than the interests of the ruling class as a whole, and that he's at odds with many within his own class. And even though Trump has not done a very good job and has really just kind of gone along with the overall interests of imperialism, they view Donald Trump as dangerous, as building a mass base, and that there is a struggle within the American government apparatus. That's clear. The FBI doesn't like Trump, so Trump put Kash Patel in charge of the FBI. The CIA and FBI don't like Trump, so Trump put Tulsi Gabbard as head of national intelligence, and she's trying to dismantle and control the FBI's counterintelligence wing, which, and that's going on. Meanwhile, ICE likes Trump. And so Trump is beefing up ICE and hiring ICE and having ICE go around and do all these raids because the ICE is the agency staffed full of people who like Trump. And so there is a deep state fight going on with different factions in the American deep state that, are at odds with each other. Trump likes ICE. FBI and CIA don't like Trump. Tulsi Gabbard is director of national intelligence. She's on Trump's side. Kash Patel is the FBI director, and he's trying to kind of control the FBI for Trump, but not exactly. Looks like he's compromising with the FBI a little bit. He's not fully where Tulsi's at. This is a complicated mess. It's reflective of a couple of different things. First of all, let's just get a couple facts straight that get obscured, right? One problem that we have in America is called deep state overlap, right? You go to Russia, they've got one policing agency at the federal level, right? They got their local cops on the street, they have their army, and then they have the Federal Security Bureau, the FSB. Pretty simple, right? They used to have the KGB during the Soviet times. Now they have the FSB, the Federal Security Bureau. And if you go to Britain, you got MI5 and MI6. In America, it's not like that. In America, intelligence agencies and federal police, and it's all a big clustered mess, right? A lot of people think the FBI are the federal police. You are wrong about that. They are not. We have had federal police since the beginning of the country. Since the Department of Justice was formed, we've had federal police. We've had U.S. Marshals who enforce U.S. law. We've had, I think they called them J-men for the Department of Justice, or G-men, right? That was what they used to call the, officers of the Department of Justice who did arrests. The FBI was formed after the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. That Mitchell Palmer was the head of the Department of Justice. and he carried out what was called the Palmer Raids, where they deported thousands of people for being communists or being radicals or whatnot. And during Mitchell Palmer's running of the Department of Justice during the Woodrow Wilson administration, during those years, there was a congressional librarian named J. Edgar Hoover who went around giving lectures on the evils of communism. He was a librarian at the Library of Congress. He lived with his mother. He was kind of a strange guy, but he was really good at giving speeches about the evils of communism. And he was going around, and at the same time, members of Congress who have to have houses in D.C. had their homes blown up. There was some anarchist was going around blowing up the homes of members of Congress. They were all scared of the communists, and J. Edgar Hoover was the expert on communists. And so Mitchell Palmer created a bureau within the Department of Justice called the Bureau of Investigation, the BOI. And eventually that became known as the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So the way the federal government works, right? Just basic, we were taught this in school, kind of, but, the American government, you have three branches of government, right? You have the legislative branch, which is the House of Representatives and the Senate, right? And they are the group that pass and create laws. Then we have the judicial branch, which is the Supreme Court, and they rule about whether or not laws are in line with the Constitution. Their job is to enforce constitutionality and constitutional procedure. That's the U.S. Supreme Court, the 9 Supreme Court justices. And then we have the executive branch, which is the wing of the federal government run by the president, and they are the enforcers, right? The way we were taught in school was that the legislative branch creates the law, the Supreme Court, the judicial branch, interprets the law, and the executive branch of the president enforces the law. That's generally how we were taught. And within the executive branch, which is headed by the president is the head of the executive branch. That's where all the wings of the federal government's activities are, right? The legislative branch doesn't do anything. They just, pass laws and discuss passing laws. They're the legislative branch. The Supreme Court, again, doesn't do anything. It just makes rulings. The executive branch carries out the federal government's business. That's the executive branch. That's who all the federal employees work for. They all work for the president. They're part of the executive branch. And the executive branch is divided into departments. They have departments, and all of the departments then have bureaus, right? And what is a bureau? A bureau is a desk. It's a bunch of drawers, right? It's a piece of furniture that has drawers in it, right? And so the departments the executive branch is divided into departments, and the departments are divided into bureaus. So when it comes to policing in the United States, we have the Department of Justice, right, headed by the Attorney General. But within the Department of Justice, there are bureaus, right? There's the Bureau of Alcohol, Firearms, Explosives, and Tobacco. I always joke that they're the bureau that has the best parties. They have the wildest parties, right? The Bureau of Alcohol, Firearms, Explosives, and Tobacco. I mean, those guys, when they get together, it's a rowdy night. That's a joke. That's a stupid joke. But anyway, and then you have the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which is a bureau, right? You have you have the Department of Education, right? You have the Department of Treasury, which handles government spending, right? And money and the funds of the federal government, right? And these departments are part of the executive branch. And federal employees tend to work for the most part, they work for the executive branch in one of the bureaus or departments that hires them. So that's how it works. And the Bureau of Investigation is part of the Department of Justice. But it's an intelligence agency. It's an intelligence agency, but it's not the only one, right? The FBI is by far not the only. It's very far from the only intelligence agency. Obviously, we have what's called the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. But in addition to the CIA, every division of the U.S. military has its own intelligence agency. There is U.S. Army intelligence, U.S. Navy intelligence, U.S. Marine Corps intelligence, U.S. Air Force intelligence. There is Coast Guard intelligence. Yes, I am dead serious about this, right? So every wing of the U.S. Armed Forces has its own intelligence agency. There's also the National Security Agency, the NSA. All right, so right now we've got the FBI, the CIA, Navy intelligence, Army intelligence, Coast Guard intelligence, Air Force intelligence, Marine Corps intelligence, National Security Agency. You see this? This is a long list. And there's a bunch of them that I haven't even thought of, right? I haven't even mentioned that handle intelligence. So you got all of those intelligence agencies. And then you add to that there are a number of other entities in the country that act like intelligence agencies. For example, the New York City Police Department, the NYPD, that is a local policing agency. You got, Smallville, Kansas has the Smallville Police Department. New York City has the New York City Police Department. However, because New York City is such a big city, and because 9/11 happened here, etc., the New York City Police Department is huge. It's fucking huge. It's larger than the army of most countries. They have what is essentially a military base, which is their training facility that has a big moat around it. It's like they've got a big military base that is the NYPD facility. And believe it or not, the NYPD has an office in every single U.S. state, every single one, and in Tel Aviv, in Israel. The New York City Police Department has offices outside of the United States. And even though they're not technically an intelligence agency, if they have a bureau and they have an office in every single state in this country, and they also have an office outside of this country, they might as well be a goddamn intelligence agency. So you have the NYPD. Like, are you starting to understand here how crazy the American deep state is? It is a complete clusterfuck, right? The intelligence apparatus, the military, the security services, the policing agencies of the United States are so vast and so scattered and disorganized, and they all want more money, and they're competing for different budgets, number one. And on top of that, a lot of what they do is not done by them. They contract private companies in order to do it. So these private companies, especially when it comes to electronic stuff, like, stuff done related to the internet or surveillance where they spy on people, they tend to hire private companies to do that. So you have private companies that are hired by one of these policing agencies that are competing with other private companies to get the contract from the policing agencies and security services and intelligence agencies that are competing with other intelligence agencies and security services to get the budget. The American deep state is a complete mess. It's a complete mess. And part of the reason it's a complete mess is because we have this libertarian mindset in America. In America, we like to pretend that we're the kind of country, we don't need secret police. We don't have political police. People in America are free to believe whatever they want. We don't have a secret police that drags people away in the middle of the night. We would never do that. What we do, it's called the FBI. Plenty of people get dragged away in the middle of the night, right? Mark Clark, Fred Hampton, ICE is dragging people away in the middle of the night as we speak. The Uhuru movement, their offices got raided. Scott Ritter's home got raided. People get dragged away in the middle of the night. There's Guantanamo Bay. We do have that. But we in America, we have this belief that we shouldn't have it. And it's almost like, if somebody has like a compulsive habit, something that they don't want to do, they will often not arrange their life around doing it because they don't want to do it, right? Somebody who says, I should never use drugs, when they're budgeting for the month, they don't say, all right, well, I'm going to set aside $500 to get cocaine to snort up my nose. They don't do that because they say I shouldn't be doing it. However, if they're addicted, it comes time that they have a huge craving, and you know what? Money that they budgeted for something else ends up getting, handed to the drug dealer so they can blow the cocaine up their nose. And that's kind of how America is with its deep state. We want to pretend we don't have one, but we do. We have to have one, right? That's how governments work. You can't have a government in the 21st century that doesn't have an oppressive apparatus, but we're in denial about it. So we do it sloppily. And we do it in this way of like trying to deny that we're doing it. And our propaganda, the American propaganda, is that, oh no, Americans can believe whatever they want. Oh no, this is the land of freedom. And that's all bullshit, right? When you apply to become a U.S. citizen, one of the first questions they ask you, it's actually on the form, are you a communist? And if you say yes, they can't make you a U.S. citizen. Did you know that? We don't have a non-political government in America. We have a heavily political government in America that's heavily political, but we pretend we don't. And because we pretend we don't, we're constantly setting the apparatus for political repression up in ways that are very inefficient, sloppy, and it's because we're constantly putting on a song and dance, pretending that we're not doing what we do. And it's a particularly interesting thing. And in a way, you could argue it's kind of an advantage for the United States. For those of us that are anti-imperialists in the United States, at least, it's an advantage because, this is the apparatus that would be repressing us. And it's very sloppy and disorganized. It doesn't know what it's doing. Now, the position that Tulsi Gabbard holds, the Director of National Intelligence, the ODNI, that was created after 9/11 specifically to deal with this problem. The understanding after 9/11 was that various agencies had some information that 9/11 was happening, but they weren't organized enough. And so they created one job, the Office of the Director of the National Intelligence, ODNI. And the job of the ODNI was to have one person, with a team that assembles all the data, prepare a daily briefing to give to the president. So the president gets one briefing. He doesn't get a bunch of emails from the FBI and the CIA that he doesn't have time to read. He gets one daily intelligence briefing from one person, the Director of National Intelligence, who says, Mr. President, and they give him one daily briefing that he reads and he looks over and makes his decisions on. Now, the idea, at least in theory, was that things like 9/11 wouldn't happen, because the president wouldn't have to open all his emails to find out about it. He would get one briefing that says, oh, there's going to be an attack on 9/11. And he says, by golly, stop that. Stop that. You make them stop. And then they stop, right? I mean, I'm being hokey here. But that was the idea for creating the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, was that with all these different intelligence agencies, all briefing the president not having time to read all these briefings, important data gets lost. So it was an attempt to kind of centralize at least the intelligence agencies, the 13 intelligence agencies of the federal government. That doesn't include other entities that are not intelligence agencies, like the NYPD, for example, like the Department of Treasury. The Secret Service that protects the president's life is not technically an intelligence agency. The Secret Service works for the Department of Treasury. So, but does the Secret Service do investigations? You betcha. Does the Secret Service have arrest power and arrest people? You betcha. Does the Secret Service, engage in surveillance and get warrants to spy on people? You betcha. They're technically not an intelligence agency. These things are complicated and weird. And this is part of, the U.S. federal government is shut down. And so we're in this moment watching the U.S. government be shut down, and we're realizing how confused the federal government is. We have this mindset in America. We don't need a strong central government, though we clearly do. And so we have sloppily set up a federal government that we are kind of in denial about having. And yes, when important entities need something, it gets done. Right. When, and that's actually what Tulsi Gabbard pointed out in her piece about Russiagate. Right. James Clapper, who was the first Director of National Intelligence, Dick Cheney said, we really need some evidence that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. And the intelligence agency said, yeah, but Iraq doesn't have weapons of mass destruction. And Dick Cheney said, I think we need some evidence, wink, 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 that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. And James Clapper got the memo, And in his autobiography, he said, well, we were told to find proof of something, and we found it. And they found it. And they found evidence of something that was not true, because that's what the U.S. federal government needed. And, and then Barack Hussein Obama went to the same guy who still had the job after the Bush administration and said, I'm curious if Russia's meddling in the U.S. elections. So he went back and has sent the FBI and CIA and all these people. And he said, they're not. And Obama said, okay. And then Obama went back to them and said, why don't you investigate whether or not Russia is meddling in the U.S. elections? And they went back and they did their report, and no, Russia's not meddling. And Obama said, I could really use some evidence, wink, 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 that Russia's meddling in the U.S. elections, wink, wink, wink. So, third time's the charm. They came back and they published this report. And apparently, the main piece that the entire report was based on was this Steele dossier. A British intelligence officer named Christopher Steele wrote a dossier, which they make it sound fancy. A dossier. Yeah, so I've got a dossier. It's a piece of fucking paper, all right? He typed it on his computer, right? I mean, it's like, you think it's a dossier, right? It's a dossier, right? It must be like wrapped in like parchment and delivered. It's like shot on an arrow from like, no, it's a piece of fucking paper, right? It's not a communique, it's like a statement. It's not a statement, it's a communique. Right? It's not a document. It's not a piece of fucking paper. No, it's a dossier. So Christopher Steele gave us a dossier, right? And this dossier from Christopher Steele, which means a guy named Christopher Steele typed something on his computer. But it sounds so important because it's a dossier. And I mean, he was an important guy. I guess he was a British intelligence officer. And he said that, Donald Trump went to Russia. And while he was in Russia, he hired a prostitute to pee on him, and he hired a prostitute to pee on him on a bed that was previously slept on by Barack Obama. And he paid lots of money. That Donald Trump paid lots of money to have a prostitute pee on him while he was sitting on a bed that had once been slept on by Barack Obama, and maniacally evil Putin secretly videotaped it. And now Putin can tell Trump what to do because they've got this tape of Donald Trump getting peed on by prostitutes in a bed of Barack Obama. Now, the whole thing sounds particularly absurd. I mean, I don't know what Donald Trump's sexual proclivities are. Maybe Donald Trump does like to get peed on by women. None of my goddamn business. But it's a little bit fantastical. It's a little silly. It's a little stupid. And, I don't know. In this day and age, they've accused Trump of everything under the sun, and Stormy Daniels, and, having a book of Hitler's writings by his bed, and raping his ex-wife, and raping this woman. And, I don't think, if that were true, I don't think Donald Trump would go, oh shit, I can't have people know about this. I'll be destroyed. Like, Donald Trump wouldn't care. But that's what the Christopher Steele dossier said. It was this R-rated, salacious thing written by a British intelligence officer that said that Donald Trump was under the control of Russian President Putin because Russian President Putin had the pee-pee tape. He had this R-rated tape of Donald Trump getting peed on. The whole thing, and the FBI looked at this and they said, this is stupid. This is probably not true. This is like the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And the CIA looked at it and they said, this is stupid. This is dumb. This is probably not true. We shouldn't do this. And, the intelligence apparatus, they looked at the dossier, this very important thing, this something that a guy typed. They looked at it and they said, yeah, this is stupid. We're not using it. And then what happened? James Comey said, no, we'll go with it. We'll go with it. Yeah, we'll go with it. And people in the FBI said, are you sure? Because this is not true, probably. Like, this is really, really fucking stupid. This is really, really dumb. I really doubt that Donald Trump, I mean, and even if this were true, is Donald Trump scared that someone's going to leak a tape of him getting peed on? Like, this is really, really dumb. This is probably not true. Let's not go with this. But James Comey, director of the FBI, said, no, we're going to go with this. We're going to go with it. And they went with it. And then they announced all over American media, Russia interfered with the elections. It is a fact. Russia, they said, had interfered. You just had to believe it. What? Are you saying that the CNN might lie? Are you saying that our intelligence agencies, the NSA and the FBI, lied? Are you spreading conspiracy theories? It must be true. I mean, they said it. It's true. They said it. They said it, didn't they? And I mean, if you don't believe the FBI, that's like spreading a conspiracy theory now. Oh, you're not one of those bad people who would think that the FBI would not tell the truth, are you? I would never think. Oh, by golly, I would never think that the FBI was lying about something like the PPT. Oh my God, I trust the FBI. And so, the memo got sent out. And I remember this. I was reporting. I was heavily involved in covering the 2016 elections, and I watched this happen. And the FBI came out with this crazy claim that Russia interfered in the U.S. elections. They didn't tell us exactly what it was based on. Turns out it was based on a crazy dossier typed up by somebody that has a fantastical story about PP tapes in it. And I remember Saturday Night Live, even like, made fun of Trump. Why won't you? Trump won't admit Russia hacked our election. And it was like, it was just fact. You just had to believe that Russia had interfered in our elections. And this crazy, completely untrue claim that Russia interfered in our elections and that Donald Trump is under the control of Russian President Putin because they have a tape of him getting peed on. That has to be true. It has to be true, because if you don't believe that, then you're saying that the FBI might be lying. And that's crazy, because the FBI would never lie about anything. The FBI never lies, right? It's not like the FBI, tried to frame Martin Luther King Jr. as being gay and sent photos of Martin Luther King Jr. in the bathtub talking to Bayard Rustin and tried to destroy his reputation. They didn't do that, did they? No. It's not like the FBI wrote a really nasty letter to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. urging him to kill himself. No, they didn't do that. No, it's not like the FBI was telling us for years that Russia was going to nuke us and kill us all. No. The CIA, the FBI, they never lie about anything. Oh, no. It's not like John Brennan lied when he was being confirmed by Congress. They asked him if we were drone striking and killing people in certain countries, and he said no. And they actually were, and he lied to Congress while he was being sworn. No. It's not like the FBI, the CIA was told they should never interfere in American politics, and they had a whole program called the Congress for Cultural Freedom where they were funding American journalists and leftists. No. It's not like the CIA would pay journalists to report stories in certain ways that advance U.S. foreign policy. No. Never would that happen, right? No. Operation Mockingbird. What's that? That never happened. Never. Oh, no. It's not like the CIA that's supposed to never interfere in American politics never had a program called MK Ultra where they were walking around handing out LSD to random people on the street and dropping drugs in people's drink. No, they never did anything like that. No. Stop spreading conspiracy theories. So if you didn't believe that Russia interfered in the elections, you were just a bad person who wouldn't believe our FBI and CIA, because they've never lied to us ever. No, never. And so now Tulsi Gabbard is in that job. She's the director of national intelligence, and she's come out and said, it turns out that, turns out that, yes, indeed, they were lying about Russia interfering in the elections. Now, many of us knew that already. And we knew that. And Now we were right. You can put that in the we were right jar. And we didn't even know the half of it. All right. So yes, no, Russia did not interfere in our elections. Russia does not have a PP tape on Trump. Russia did not hack into the DNC and steal emails to make Hillary Clinton look bad. And in fact, it's worse than we thought. It's worse than we thought. Russia could have interfered in the elections if they had wanted to. I mean, have you seen this? I get emails from Media Matters. Media Matters for America sends emails out, and they say there's nothing to this story, this Russiagate story. There's nothing there. There's a lot there, folks. I don't know how they can say, oh, it's a big nothing burger. There's nothing there. There's a lot there. There's a lot there. There's a lot there. So not only did Russia not interfere with the U.S. elections, if they'd wanted to, they could have. Russia found out that Hillary Clinton was a drug addict. Yeah. Hillary Clinton was saying, oh, I'm totally fine. My health is fine. You know, the Trump campaign was putting out there that Hillary Clinton, her health is not stable. And Hillary Clinton lied about it. And that would probably cost her the election. She made a joke about it, right? She told Jimmy Kimmel, take my pulse. She made it a joke. Oh, there's nothing wrong with my health. And then on 9/11, she collapsed in front of all of the media. Right? At the 9/11 ceremony, she's walking out of the 9/11 ceremony, and she collapsed. And everyone's like, wait a second. I thought the idea there was something wrong with your health was a big joke. That was a crazy conspiracy theory from Trump. She lied. And then Google rigged the Google searches. Do you remember this? They rigged the Google searches. So if you Googled Hillary Clinton's health, you wouldn't find any of the news stories about how Hillary Clinton. So, you know, Hillary Clinton's health was actually a big part of the campaign. And it wouldn't have been if she just told the truth, right? If she just said, yeah, you know, I've had some health issues, whatever. But she lied. She lied. She ridiculed Trump about it, and she couldn't cover it up. She collapsed on 9/11. They had to drag. I mean, right? You know, she lied about it. She made it a joke. And then it turns out Russia knew a lot about it. It wasn't just that she had some health issues and was lying about it. Oh, no. She was addicted to painkillers. Hillary Clinton's a drug addict. She's got a compulsive drug addiction issue. So not only did she have health problems, she's a drug addict. Now, if just the fact that she had lied about her health could have cost her the election, if Russia had leaked that, Hillary Clinton is addicted to drugs, she would have lost hands down. She would have lost hands down, but Russia sat on it. They didn't release that information. There are audio recordings, apparently, of Hillary Clinton having psychotic meltdowns at her staff and fits of anger and mental health issues that Russia could have released. And according to Tulsi Gabbard, they sat on it. They didn't release them. If Russia had wanted to interfere in the elections to help Donald Trump, they very well could have. They chose not to. So when they told us that Russia interfered in their election, in the U.S. elections, they were lying like you wouldn't fucking believe. They were not just lying. They were like, no, Russia went out of its way not to interfere. If Russia had wanted to help Trump win, they had everything they needed. Boom. They could have done it. And they didn't. But yet it was shoved down our throat that Russia interfered in the election. It was just a fact. It was just a fact. Russia interfered in the election. They interfered in the election. Yes, they did. It is a fact. And if you disagree with it, you're spreading conspiracy theories and you must be a Trumper. You must be a neo-Nazi white supremacist. Right? You remember this. It was sickening. It was absolutely sickening. And like, if you didn't think that Russia, you know, had interfered in the elections, you were a conspiracy theorist, you were a bad person and all that. And turns out Russia did not interfere in the elections. All of this is very important. Look, I wrote a book I wrote the book shortly after January 6th, and I've got a copy of it around here somewhere. Yeah, here it is. This is the book I wrote, and I've put out sections of this book in like smaller pamphlet form. It's called Where is America Going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution. And I've been taking chapters of it. I've taken 3 of the chapters and turned them into smaller little pamphlet books. But in this book, I explain what's going on. Why, and I have January 6th on the cover, and I explain what's happening in the country. This is a process. It's called Bonapartism. When there is a capitalist crisis, right, when the economy starts slowing down because the rate of profit is dropping and technology has removed workers from the assembly line and wages are going down and the rate of profit that they make on each item is going down and the market becomes glutted with products that cannot be sold. That's the Great Depression of the 1930s. That's, all the panics on the stock market. It's this problem that the capitalist system has that no previous economic system has ever had. It's called glut, right? And that is the problem with capitalism. It has unnatural economic problems. Poverty created by abundance. Poverty amid plenty. People become homeless because there are too many houses. People become hungry because there is too much food. The market becomes so saturated with goods, but the spending power of the worker is not enough to buy them. And so companies go out of business, people become unemployed, and the economy shuts down because there's so much wealth. And that doesn't make sense. That's a completely unnatural problem. And capitalism is the only economic system that has ever had this problem. All right, glut. The market becomes glutted with products that cannot be sold. And the U.S. government, and just like all the other capitalist governments, is constantly scrambling, trying to deal with the problem of overproduction. And the U.S. government buys a bunch of cheese and buries it in a cave, and we spend a shit ton on weapons and bombs and tanks and guns and all kinds of military spending. And it's a big fucking problem. It's a big problem. It's a big problem. It's a little bit of a problem. It's a big, big problem. And technology makes the problem worse. It exacerbates the problem. And when there is a long-term capitalist crisis, right? Long-term capitalist crises tend to come after great technological leaps. The Great Depression of the 1930s was after great innovations in assembly line technology. Henry Ford and Taylor and others had developed a very efficient form of industrial capitalism. They figured out how to make assembly lines super efficient. The efficiency of the market was better than ever before. And in the 1920s, they actually had the slogan, Ford has overtaken Marx, right? Henry Ford, it was said, had figured out this ultra efficient form of capitalism. And because of that, the capitalist economy came to a grinding halt. You had the Great Depression of the 1930s because there had been great technological leaps. Production had become more efficient than ever before, and the natural result of that is glut. Well, that's what happened. When you have a big technological leap, you have a long-term capitalist crisis. Used to be there was a capitalist crisis every couple years, but they got better at holding them off. They invented the Federal Reserve. They invented different mechanisms for stabilizing the economy. But you still have the problem. The basic problem is still there. And in the 1930s, even though they had the Federal Reserve, even though they had all kinds of stuff, the economy came to a grinding halt. And the only thing that got the economy going again was World War II. Every major city in Western Europe and in Asia was destroyed by violence. There was mass killing and destruction. And then after World War II, you had the post-World War II economic expansion. So the economy got going again. There had been so much death and killing and destruction that the economy got going again. And America was the only country in the Western world that wasn't destroyed. There was no fighting on our soil. So our factories were still intact. And so the world needed steel. They bought it from America. The world needed refrigerators. They had to buy it from America. The world needed cars. They had to buy it from America. It took Europe and all the other countries a long time to get their industries going. because they'd been blown up by war. But America was the one industrial Western country that was at this, was fully intact at the end of World War II. So everyone had to buy their shit from us, and our living standards went up, and the world experienced the post-World War II economic expansion. But what happened during the Second World War? Something was developed called Alan Turing's decoding machine. Alan Turing, a brilliant mathematician in Britain, was hired by the British government to make a decoding machine. And he developed a quote-unquote thinking machine, the very beginning of what we now call modern computer technology, a machine that could think. And because of that, after World War II, industry started to figure out how can we utilize what Alan Turing did, this decoding machine the British developed. How can we utilize that for industrial purposes? And starting in the 1950s and 60s, you had IBM, and you had Apple eventually in the 70s. Computer technology started expanding. And by the 70s and 80s, there was a huge leap in computer technology. And because of that, all of a sudden, computer technology made it more efficient than ever to produce goods. And in the 70s and 80s, the economy started slowing down because technology had made it easier to produce goods. And we started to have crises of overproduction once again. The United States decided to make it itself the center of the world computer revolution. And this is very important. In 1970s, Zbigniew Brzezinski, the Cold War strategist, the head of the international studies, they call it the Cold War University of Columbia University, he wrote a book called The Technotronic Era about how America could rule the world by putting itself at the center of the information revolution. And in that book, he argued that the new left, the 1960s anti-Vietnam War protest movement, the Black liberation movement, and also some of the anti-colonial struggles around the world, they didn't represent a threat of communist revolution. They were just a response to new access to technology. Because Americans had more access to technology, they were wanting to conform less, and that social conservatism, the relationships people have with authority and power and religion and tradition were changing because of access to information. People had more information, so they weren't as traditional as they used to be, etc. And that rather than trying to suppress the new left, Zbigniew Brzezinski said, we can use the new left and we can use it to bring down what he called institutional Marxism, the Soviet Union, the Eastern Bloc. And that by making the United States the center of information technology, we can, quote, Americanize the world. That's what Brzezinski argues in his book on the Technotronic Era. Between Two Ages, America Enters the Technotronic Era. I think that's the title of the book. It's an obscure book, but it's important. You read it. It's like very, very important. And so what happened? If you Google it, it sounds too crazy to be true. There would be no Silicon Valley without the CIA, the NSA, the FBI. DARPA was the first internet. That was Department of Defense. Amazon was basically created by the U.S. Department of Defense. They're propped up by the U.S. military and the Pentagon. The NSA paid for Microsoft and loaned them money, and the CIA, and it was an intelligence operation. Very, very clearly. They said, look, we can invest in setting up and putting ourselves at the center of the technological revolution. And the Soviet Union was very good at computers. And they were, actually. The Soviet Union developed their own home computer system in 1981 with no foreign technology. But the Soviet Union just didn't have the resources to mass produce computers and distribute them all throughout the country. They just didn't have the resources to do it. And there was the Treaty on Multilateral Controls. There was a treaty that all the NATO countries said they would never share computer technology with the West or with the Soviet Union, with the Eastern Bloc. And so the Western countries were advancing ahead with the computer revolution, and it was leading to a crisis of overproduction. The Soviet Union did not have the same computer technology. And then we know what happened. 1989, to 1991, you had the fall of the Eastern Bloc, and a huge section of the world that had been independent, had been outside of the Western market, fell. And as a result of that, there was starting to be an economic crisis. People remember this in the early 90s. There was starting to be an economic crisis, and then it stopped. Why? Well, because suddenly a big chunk of the planet was open for business, right? And it was open for foreign investment. And Russia was no longer producing its own food. It had to buy American food. And Russia was no longer producing its own steel. It had to buy American steel. And the fall of the Soviet Union boosted the U.S. economy. And China was opening up. And China was buying American goods and products. And China was loaning the American government huge amounts of money. Right? That was basically a demand made on China. If we're going to invest in your country, we're going to have normal relations, you have to loan us money. People make it sound like we're in debt to China. We owe China. No, it was like kind of China was forced in order to get normalization of trade relations with the United States. You must loan us this money. And so China was loaning America huge amounts of money, and Eastern Europe was open for business. And you had the dot-com boom of the 90s. Right. And actually, I do recommend people read this book. All right. I'll pull it out here. This book. Hold on. This book, High Tech, Low Pay by Sam Marcy. All right. This is a very good book of economics. But this edition of the book, this is the newer edition of the book that was published in like 2009. In the introduction by Fred Goldstein, he talks about the 3 jobless recoveries. Right. And how in the early 90s, when the U.S. economy got going again, because of the fall of the Soviet Union, because China, when the Bush slump, right? You remember there was starting to be an economic slump. Bill Clinton was elected president. The first Bush had only one term. There was starting to be an economic slump. And then the economy got going. It was what they called a jobless recovery, meaning that Wall Street and the stock market was rising again without an uptick in employment. And economists had never seen anything like this before, a jobless recovery. How the hell was there a jobless recovery? That doesn't make any sense, a jobless recovery. But it happened. And that's not supposed to happen. You're not supposed to have, when there's an economic recovery, people get jobs. But there was a jobless recovery. But then the dot-com boom, suddenly there were jobs and all of that. But they were freaked out. And so we had the boom in the 90s, the dot-com boom. Everything seemed fine, right? All of that. But then around 2000, things started slowing down again. The economy started slowing down again, you'll remember. And there was suddenly unemployment. The stock market was going down. Everyone was getting nervous again. And then what happened? 9/11 happened. And George W. Bush got on television. They asked him, President Bush, what can Americans do after 9/11 if they want to help the country? He said, if you like America, you want to help America defeat the terrorists, you got to go shopping. Remember that? It was one of the craziest moments. What in the world is he talking about, right? People are seeing the horrible images of 9/11, the ruins of the World Trade Center and all the dust and all that. If you want to help defeat Al-Qaeda, you have got to go shopping. Why? Because the U.S. economy was slowing down. People couldn't keep spending. And the dot-com boom burst. And what happened before that? 1999, there was the crash on the Asian markets. So there were various governments. This is very interesting. There were various governments in Asia. They call them the Asian tigers. South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, the government on Taiwan, Japan. Japan's not technically an Asian tiger, but it's the Asian markets, they called it. These are countries that the USA tolerated because they were a barrier against communism, right? South Korea, you had the government of Park Chung-hee and the military dictatorship. In Singapore, you have Lee Kuan Yew, a Bonapartist kind of authoritarian regime in Singapore. You had the government on Taiwan, which was like a military dictatorship up until like the 90s and, was very authoritarian. But all 3 of those countries had gotten a huge amount of investment from Japan and from the United States, and the USA had let them build up their own economy. South Korea has a number of companies, private companies that were built by the government. This is dirgism, right? It's kind of like what Putin did with Gazprom and Rosneft. They build government-controlled corporations in order to stabilize their economy. It started with POSCO, the state-run steel industry in South Korea, but now there's Hyundai, Samsung. There's a lot of corporations in South Korea that are technically private, but are like controlled by and paid for and subsidized by the South Korean government. Why did the USA let this happen? Because they didn't want, South Korea to join with North Korea and become a communist country. So they had to kind of look the other way while South Korea built itself up. And the same with Singapore, right? Singapore, they didn't particularly like what Lee Kuan Yew was doing, but, he was fighting the commies. He was not a communist. So they let it happen. In Singapore and Taiwan and South Korea, they were able to build themselves up as strong independent countries with their own economies, their own car manufacturers, their own factories, their own electronics, and all of this. It was the Asian markets. But the USA didn't particularly like all of those countries. And also China was becoming stronger, and these countries were all happy to do business with China, And so in the late 90s, George Soros and a number of other wealthy people connected to the American intelligence, a lot of wealthy investors, they planned it. And this is actually illegal, all right? This is like price fixing. This is something that's illegal. But it's illegal if you do it in America. But I guess if you do it in another country, it's not illegal. They got together and they just pulled all their money out of the Asian markets to fuck over Lee Kuan Yew and South Korea and Taiwan. And they pulled their money and the Asian markets crashed in the late 90s. That was a devastating blow, but it was done for geopolitical reasons, that China was rising in its influence. And these Asian tiger countries were kind of out of control. They were starting to become competitors with the United States. You had the crash on the Asian markets. So that happened, and that was not good. That rippled throughout the world economy. After 9/11, there was starting to be an economic slump. There was another jobless recovery. They had another jobless recovery. And suddenly, after 9/11, the stock market is going up again, except there's no new jobs. Right? Second jobless recovery. What's going on behind the scenes is Alan Greenspan, the economist, the protege of Ayn Rand, the novelist, the objectivist, the crazy, libertarian novelist Ayn Rand, her protege, her boy toy, the teenage boy who fell in love with her and became her little, her, I don't know what you want to call it. Alan Greenspan, he was telling them Americans have to keep spending money. The spending power of the U.S. public was going down. The wages of average Americans were so low that they couldn't afford to keep spending. On top of that, student debt. Americans, to go to college, were running up thousands and thousands of dollars of debt to go to college. Household debt was through the roof. And Americans just couldn't keep spending money like they once had. They just didn't have the spending power. And so Alan Greenspan was proposing these things, and Congress was passing them, and they were legalizing all kinds of credit practices, lending practices, and mortgage, and all kinds of things that were completely illegal before. But they legalized them because they were desperate to keep Americans spending money. And I remember these days, anyone could get a credit card. I remember, it's funny, it's so different now, but people's credit cards just showed up in the mail. Oh, you can spend money. No big deal. People got into huge amounts of debt very quickly because you could get credit very easily. And credit card companies, it was quite easy to get a loan. It was quite easy to get money and get yourself into debt because they needed that spending power in the economy. But it got to the point that didn't work. And why did the 2008 financial crisis happen? Why? Well, the official answer that we're always given is the housing bubble burst. The housing bubble burst. What did that mean? Americans couldn't keep spending money. And that these loans that they've been giving people, these mortgage loans, that they were borrowing against their own home, or they were borrowing money to buy a home, it stopped. It slowed down. And people just couldn't afford to keep buying houses. And the loans that people were getting, the mortgage loans that were not being paid back, the housing bubble, and the U.S. economy came to a grinding halt. It was the epic financial crash of 2008. And ever since then, we have been in a deep political economic crisis in the United States. The economic crisis caused by the computer revolution, the decline in living standards, has led to a political crisis. There is a fight within the ruling class. But it all really gets back to the fact that technology and capitalism has this built-in problem of glut, poverty created by abundance. That's the issue. And capitalism cannot handle the computer revolution. And we're in this kind of semi-state of crisis. So the capitalists, the ruling elite, are fighting among each other. How do we resolve this long-term economic crisis? How do we resolve it? And there's divisions among the ruling class, and they're fighting about how to resolve it. They would all like it to be resolved, but they would all like the other guy to have to pay for it. They want it to be resolved at somebody else's expense. This is called Bonapartism. When the ruling class begin fighting with each other, and sections of the ruling class try to seize control of the state and use the state to stabilize the economy and to suppress rival factions within their own class, this is called Bonapartism. And Karl Marx observed it when he was living in Paris in 1851. And Louis Bonaparte, the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, seized control of the French government and used the government to crush the Party of Order, the Conservative Party, and to crush the labor unions, and to have the government build railroads and set up free hospitals for poor people and try to stabilize the French economy. It was the Second French Empire, declared by Louis Bonaparte, a military dictatorship in France, to stabilize the capitalist crisis. And that Louis Bonaparte, who was he was just this demagogue politician who raffled off gold bars and did all kinds of crazy, silly stuff to make himself popular. He became the military dictator and tried to stabilize capitalism. And Marx observed this. And he said, this is not a revolution. This is capitalism trying to resolve a crisis, and this is a division within the ruling class, and that Louis Bonaparte transcended his own class. He built a movement outside of his own class in order to fight with his own class. He was fighting with other capitalists in order to get done what he wanted to get done, and so he built this movement of lumpen proletarians, of desperately poor people, the Society of December 10th, homeless people and prostitutes and pimps and soldiers and former prisoners, and just a collection of lumpen elements, marginal elements of society that he built to be his hit squad to go after and bring himself to power. And he set up this military dictatorship to try and stabilize capitalism. And this is the natural results of a capitalist crisis. Right? That's the results. That is, and that's what we're living under right now. In a long-term crisis of overproduction, the ruling class begin to fight with each other. But that creates an opening for the people, because the people, that's you and me, we are who they go to settle their scores. They recruit working people to be their foot soldiers in the fight. And that gives us the opportunity to get politically active, to get involved in politics, and to educate masses of people, and to eventually build a movement for a whole new economy. As the ruling elite fight with each other, that creates an opening for the people to become aware of their own strength and take independent political action. And that's a good thing. So Bonapartism creates an opening. Every revolution in history started as a fight within the ruling class, right? The Russian Revolution, it started out as the bulk of the Russian ruling class didn't like the Tsar. They thought the Tsar was embarrassing. He did the whole thing with Rasputin. His wife had an affair with Rasputin the monk, and he was like the laughing stock of Europe, and World War I got going, and they viewed him as incompetent in World War I. So the capitalists of Russia got together and they ousted the Tsar. But what did they do to oust the Tsar? They called a strike. There was a strike, and usually when there was a strike, in St. Petersburg, they would just arrest the strikers. But in this instance, the police went to arrest the strikers, and the Cossacks, the mounted cavalry, went and cut the heads off of the cops and supported the strike. And there was strikes all over St. Petersburg, and the Tsar, Nicholas II, was forced to step down. A division in the ruling class brought down the Tsar. And then what happened? A new government came into being, the provisional government, led by Alexander Kerensky. But it was divided because some of the people in the provisional government wanted to keep fighting in World War I, and some of them didn't. And the people who wanted to keep fighting in World War I were people that were aligned with America and Britain. And the people who didn't tended to be people aligned with Germany. And so there was a fight, a division in the ruling class. Do we keep fighting in World War I now that the Tsar is gone? And the Bolsheviks, they were really against World War I. And German intelligence arranged for Lenin to return to Russia from Switzerland. And he and the Bolsheviks went around protesting against the war and having strikes, the July days, down with war. They wanted Russia to end the war. They wanted Russia's involvement in World War I to end. And they became the anti-war guys. They were this fighting force of 20,000, 30,000 people, a strong organization that ran labor unions and all of this that was against the war. And so the Bolsheviks are doing the July days. There's revolts going on and strikes against the war. And so Kornilov, the general of the Tsar's army who's fighting in World War I, says, I'm putting an end to this. And he starts marching his army back to St. Petersburg. And Kornilov is going to declare himself the military dictator. He's going to be the Bonapartist. He's going to stop all these strikes. He's going to crush the protests and all of that. And he starts marching toward St. Petersburg. But then what happens? The provisional government, they realize that if Kornilov takes over, they're all going to be killed. So they start arming St. Petersburg against Kornilov and against Kornilov's reaction. And they dig trenches around the city and they set up barbed wire and they're all prepared to fight off Kornilov. And as Kornilov's army is marching toward the city, the Bolsheviks become heavily involved in protecting St. Petersburg. And the army, the regular Russian army, opens the armory and gives guns to the Bolsheviks and says, fine, if you'll protect us from Kornilov's reaction, fine. And it gets to the point that the Bolshevik militia and the Bolshevik army is actually bigger than the regular army, than the regular army. And Kornilov is marching towards St. Petersburg, but a lot of the soldiers, they don't want to kill other Russians. They don't want to shoot down their brothers and sisters. And so a lot of them are quitting and they're just leaving. And finally, Kornilov says, you know what, screw it. And he turns his army around and they start marching back toward the front line to go back to fighting the Germans. The Kornilov reaction is defeated. And at that point, the Bolsheviks have a bigger army than the regular Russian government. And so they take control. They seize the telegraph office. They seize the Winter Palace. They're in charge. That's how the Russian Revolution happened. It was a division. It was multiple divisions in the ruling class. First against the Tsar, then over World War I, then the repelling of the Kornilov reaction, and then finally they took over. Chinese Revolution is a similar story. Right? And ultimately, what was the deciding factor? What ultimately brought Mao to power? The crash of the Golden Yuan, right? Chiang Kai-shek was the military dictator of China, the Republic of China, Chiang Kai-shek. And after World War II, Chiang Kai-shek had this brilliant idea that he was going to have paper currency, that China would have its own paper currency. And so he made all the rich people of China turn over their gold and get paper currency in exchange for it. And they actually imprisoned a number of rich people in China that said, oh, no, I don't trust your paper currency. They jailed a lot of rich people in China. Chiang Kai-shek said, we're going to have a paper currency. And it was called the Golden Yen, the Golden Yuan. And what happened? It crashed, and it was worthless. Worthless. And at that point, even some of the richest people who had lost all their gold, all their life savings, all their gold had been lost by Chiang Kai-shek. Even some of the richest people said, you know what, this Mao guy, he could be better than this. And Mao made an arrangement with the richest capitalists of China, the ones who had originally been Chiang Kai-shek supporters. He made an arrangement with them. They signed an agreement. We will not nationalize your property. And there were actually millionaires in China up until the early 1960s. It was called the New Democratic Revolution. And a lot of the wealthy capitalists of China, after Chiang Kai-shek ruined the Golden Yen and the Golden Yuan went out, and it was an alliance, and that Mao took power not promising socialism. It was a new democratic revolution, is what they called it. The new democratic revolution. And it was, we're going to redistribute land to the countryside, to the peasantry, and we're going to get money from the Soviet Union to build power plants and all of that. But don't worry, millionaires, we won't touch you. And a lot of wealthy Chinese capitalists went over to the Chinese Communist Party's side. And in 1949, the Chinese Communist Party came to power. Again, it was a division within the ruling class. And that it's divisions within the ruling class. They create an opening for illiberal organizations, people that are building movements, right? Mao had built this mass movement that was aligned with, first it was aligned with Chiang Kai-shek, and then they went into the countryside and they fought against Chiang Kai-shek. And then when Japan invaded, they aligned with Chiang Kai-shek again. And they had this mass movement, and there was a division within the ruling class, a Bonapartist division. And that's how the Chinese Communist Party was able to come to power. And there's so many examples of this. You go throughout U.S. history, right? U.S. history, right? Well, I mean, when the Second American Revolution, Abraham Lincoln, that was a division in the ruling class over slavery. And how is it that the civil rights movement got going? How did the civil rights movement get going? There was a division in the ruling class about how we deal with the Soviet Union and the black question, and the military industrial complex. And I mean, divisions in the ruling class are the result of a capitalist crisis. And it's divisions in the ruling class that create an opening for the people, for mass movements to become important, because the ruling class are fighting among each other, and mass movements, play an important role in those fights. They enter strategic alliances with factions of the ruling class. They bring people into motion. They engage in activity. And it's the divisions in the ruling class and the activation of mass movements that ultimately leads to revolutions. So in a way, we should consider ourselves to be very lucky to be living in the times that we're living in. I guess that's what I'm saying in a long, roundabout way. We're living in the era of a long-term capitalist crisis, a crisis of glut, overproduction, spawned by technological advancement. But there are divisions within the ruling class, and we now have the opportunity to build a mass movement to assert the needs of the American people, to demand a government of action that fights for working families, to demand that we break out of this imperialist system and we build a new America where the needs of working families come first. This is a great opportunity that we have. That's what I'm explaining in a long roundabout way. I'm explaining with economics. Thank goodness that I learned and studied Marxist economics. Thank goodness I was taught Marxist economics by people like Bill Doers and Fred Goldstein, who probably vehemently oppose what I'm doing now, and I don't care. Thank goodness I came to understand this stuff. But yes, that's the situation we're in. We're dealing with a long-term crisis of overproduction. And now is the time to build a mass movement that will align with different factions in the ruling class to point forward to a new way for America beyond imperialism. And that's how you can understand the situation that we're in. And actually, there's a, Cornelius Cardew song. Cornelius Cardew is this British Marxist composer. He's an acquired taste. I like him ironically. Okay. I realize his music is pretty hokey. Okay. I like him ironically because it's like very, very ideological Marxist lyrics. I like him ironically. And he has a song where he talks about a capitalist crisis, divisions in the ruling class, and all of that. It's called Lords of Labor. It's about the Labor Party selling out the workers. So I'm going to put that song on. If you got any questions for the second half of the show, buy me a coffee is the best way to send them in. Buy me a coffee. You can also Rumble Rant me. You can also Cash at me at Caleb Moppet 22. I'm going to put the Cardew song on. Then we'll do the roll call. Then I'll answer people's questions. So yeah, let's do it.
The Lords of Labor, they put together the bankrupt schemes to keep us down. Their message to the working class is to cringe before the rich man's frown. They say that it's in the whole country's interest to tighten our belts and make no demands, but they speak for the class that exploits us and rules us, and we must get them all off our hands. Our labor power is all system is called wage slavery, but democracy sounds a bit more polite. They say that if our wage increases, the prices will rise to compensate, but the only ones who receive compensation are capitalist vampires who suck out our life. Proposal attempts to make the working class pay for the capitalist crisis. Proposal attempts to make the working class pay for the capitalist crisis. The capitalists fight with one another to corner the market and divide up the world. The quest for maximum profit is the cause of war and puts us on the door. Their greed leads them into a crisis they try to resolve with a more fascist state. Our struggles against the whole capitalist system, so strike at the fascists as well as the cuts. Proposal attempts to make the working class pay for the capitalist crisis. Proposal attempts to make the working class pay for the capitalist crisis.
Yes, I like that music. I know it's hokey. It's kind of an acquired taste. All right, names and locations. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? And then I will start answering questions. Names and locations. We got Jacob from Pensacola. Very cool. Very, very cool. We got Amazing Blonde Band UK, Kew Gardens, New York, John McCarthy in Chicago, Bendigo, Australia, David Fox, St. David's, Bermuda, JT24 in Mississippi, JDL, Missouri, Jane in New Zealand, Chad in Spokane, Washington, Alex in Brazil, good to see you, Toronto, Canada, woo, Blue State, Washington near Seattle, Brooklyn in the house, Phil High, and we'll play your favorite song tonight, Phil, have no fear, the South of the United States, Elliot in Austin, Texas, good to see you, Mr. Elliot. Good to see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us? Tijuana, Mexico. Very good. Mundo Cat from Tijuana. Rocky Island County in Illinois. Rock Island County. No, I've joked that my mother's religion is the Music Man, the musical, and the opening song of the Music Man is called Rock Island. And it's a bunch of salesmen on a train. Cash for the merchandise, cash for the cotton goods or whatever. But it's called Rock Island because the Rock Island line was apparently a very famous railroad back in the early 20th century. The Music Man is quite an interesting, my mother just absolutely loved the Music Man. It meant a lot to her. It was just a musical that really spoke to my mother. I think about the Music Man. It's kind of interesting. I would call it anti-populist. I would call it, it's fun, right? It's a fun musical, but it is kind of that post World War II, early Cold War anti-populism, right? It's kind of the townspeople are scary, ignorant, totalitarian people, that persecute intellectuals. That is kind of a theme, but it's done in kind of a fun song and dance kind of way. I don't know, but he doesn't know the territory exactly. Well, he's been a fraud the whole time, Gavin. Everyone knows he's a fraud. That's the point. The people in the town don't know, but the play, he's a fraud. In fact, that's that opening song, the Rock Island line, as the other salesmen are talking about. He's a what? He's a Music Man. and that he's a fraud, right? Is that he's a fraud, and the people in the town don't quite know it. But the audience knows it the whole time. Yeah, yeah. So I don't know. I was recently comparing. So there's a play about evolution, and it's called, or it's not about evolution, but it's about the Scopes monkey trial, the famous trial about evolution. It's called Inherit the Wind. Inherit the Wind is like the dark version of The Music Man. The Music Man is the fun song and dance. It's like, whatever. Small town people are ignorant, intellectuals are persecuted, whatever, but it's fun. Inherit the Wind is the dark version of it. But they both kind of have the same message. It's like small town American Christians are a bunch of ignorant bigots who go after smart people. That's kind of the message of both of them. And that's kind of a late early Cold War. They're both really about McCarthyism, right? And I believe the guy who wrote The Music Man, who starred in it, was actually persecuted by McCarthyism. And Inherit the Wind has nothing to do with the Scopes monkey trial. Many people in 1927, there's a very famous case of John Scopes, who was a teacher in a small town in like Kentucky, who was teaching evolution, and he was arrested, and there was a big trial about it. But the play that they made based on it, a hit Broadway play called Inherit the Wind, has absolutely nothing to do with what actually happened at the Scopes monkey trial. Inherit the Wind is a play about McCarthyism. It's about McCarthyism and like demagogue right-wingers persecuting intellectuals. And that's not what happened. The Scopes monkey trial is actually, it was, like one of the main arguments against evolution was against Malthusianism, for example. And William Jennings Bryan, who was the prosecutor at the Scopes monkey trial, was a populist. He was the guy who brought the populist party into the Democratic Party. And he argued, one of his main arguments was that capitalism would lead to eugenics, or that evolution would lead to eugenics, and that evolution would lead to free market capitalism and World War I. And none of that comes across. Inherit the Wind, basically, the William Jennings Bryan character is just this right-wing demagogue preacher who's going after those smart, bookish people. And, it's whatever, right? The Music Man is like fun. It has a happy ending. It's whatever, but it's still kind of the same thing, right? In Inherit the Wind, the small town science teacher is persecuted by a mob of ignorant people, rallying around this right-wing demagogue. In The Music Man, there's a town of ignorant people in Iowa that are mean, and there's a small town woman who's a librarian, and she's persecuted by them, and she feels lonely. And then this con man salesman comes to town, and she falls in love with him, and everyone finds out that he's a con man. But I don't know. Both of them, they both kind of represent the anti-populism of like post-McCarthyist America, early 60s, late 50s. It's a lot like the Twilight Zone that came out around the same time. It's Cold War liberalism, and it's Cold War liberal anti-populism. Average small-town American, Christian, conservative, heartland people are dangerous, scary, ignorant fascists. That's basically the message of the play, of both plays. Again, one is a little more fun, song and dance. The other is a little dark and scary. And it's interesting to think about, so yeah, it's interesting to think about. There's another play that came out before World War II. It's called Our Town. And that play is not performed as much anymore. It used to be widely performed in American high schools. It's not performed as much anymore. Our Town is not anti-populist, interestingly. It's about a very small town in the Midwest, or I think it's in like New England, right? It's a small town in New England. And it's a 1930s, I think it's like a Roosevelt era play. And it's about a small town and small town culture. And it's kind of sad, right? It's kind of sad and it's absurd, but it is not anti-populist. The people are not the enemy. If you watch Our Town, you could argue that Our Town is religiously, what do you call it? It's, it has an afterlife in it that's not Christian. But I mean, if that bothers you, I mean, that's whatever. That's a religious difference. But Our Town is pro people. It's pro working class. The people are good for the most part. It's just about a small town in like New England, basically, and then it ends. It's like in 3 acts. The final act is the woman dies. The main character dies, and then she's in the afterlife, and she's looking back over her life. And the point is to love your fellow man and try to do as much good as you can. And she's like in spirit world or whatever, looking at her life and wishing she had appreciated the moments in life where she was spending time with her kids, wishing she'd been nicer to people and all that. You know, our town is about a small town. But it's not anti-populist. And it's interesting. I'd be curious as to there was a writer named Sherwood Anderson who was a communist. And he wrote a novel in the 1930s that was about a small town. It's called Winesburg, Ohio. I've never read Winesburg, Ohio. And again, it's one of these pieces about a small town, and or in 1919, Winesburg, Ohio. And is Winesburg, Ohio anti-populist or not? I've not read it. It is about apparently like a man in a small town who's an intellectual nonconformist, doesn't fit in. But are the people the enemy, or what's the issue? So I don't know. I mean, what do I know? So I have never read Winesburg, Ohio, but I know Sherwood Anderson, the writer, was a leftist. He was a communist sympathizer, maybe later in his life. I guess he wrote Winesburg, Ohio in 1919, but he later in life, he was considered like a Marxist. But Our Town was written in 1938, and it was written, it was part of the Roosevelt, part of the Grapes of Wrath, John Steinbeck National Theater Project. It was a populist play, I guess you could say. And it was, theater of the absurd, because you see the afterlife and all that, but it's not, the people are not the enemy in our town. Let me put it that way. The people are not the enemy in our town. And it's considered, we don't see Our Town as much anymore. If we see plays about small towns, you see Inherit the Wind, or you see The Music Man, but Our Town is about a similar theme. It's about a little American town. But there you go. I've made my point. But anyway, we're going to get to the questions. Kate Johnson sent 2 questions. The first one: the United States government has been bombing Somalia for almost 20 years. What role does the U.S. play in the destabilization of the country, and why? Somalia is located on the Horn of Africa. And if you look at the Horn of Africa, it's very clear the borders have not been drawn for reasons that are logical, right? It's not that the people of Somalia and the people of Djibouti and the people of Ethiopia, these are just different peoples with different land. These are not natural borders, all right? Djibouti was drawn onto the map so someone could build military bases there. Now, the USA has military bases in Djibouti. China now has a military base. That's China's only overseas military base. But what they call the Horn of Africa, the part of Africa that is very close to the Middle East, that area is very, very strategic for military purposes. It's a really, really important area, right? Because you've got the Red Sea, you've got the Suez Canal. That's a very, very vital area, okay? So keeping control of that area and making sure that no stable government emerges in that area that could be a source of problems, right? That's a really important thing. Imagine if in Somalia, they had a strong central government and a strong leader who came in and said, you know what? I am demanding that the USA give me a lot of money and let me develop the economy. I might let China put their military bases here. They can't have that, right? That's a very, very geostrategic region. If you look at the ocean, right? Look at do I have to get up a map? I have to get up a map and show you, right? But, the Horn of Africa, they call it, is a very, very geostrategic, very, very, very geostrategic place. That's the issue here. All right, here we go. I'll put the Horn of Africa. They call it the Horn of Africa. And so that's why the USA has kept Somalia destabilized. It's because it's a really, really important area. They're furious about the fact that China has a military base, in Djibouti. They're not happy about it. I've actually been to Djibouti. That's the only African country I've ever actually been to is Djibouti. But if you look at it, that's the Horn of Africa. Somalia is right there. It's really, really important, right? You've got Yemen there. You've got the Red Sea. You've got all the way up to the Suez Canal. It's a really, really important area for global trade routes. And, there was the pirates from Somalia that were holding up ships. And The USA has been bombing Somalia. They've been in Somalia since the 90s and all of that. They want to keep control of those trade routes. It's really, really important. And that's why they're mad at the Houthis, right? The Houthis are in Yemen. This is an anti-imperialist force, and they have taken control of Yemen, and they are using their control over the Red Sea to fight against Israel. So imagine what would happen if you had a strong, stable government in Somalia. Imagine, think about it, right? From geostrategic sense, it makes perfect sense why the USA has been keeping Somalia destabilized for so long, right? And yes, the USA is heavily involved in it. Somalia is it's in chaos, it's in anarchy, and there's wild, there's different warlords who control it, and the USA is drone striking, and there's military presence there. And if the USA really wanted a stable Somalia, they could have it. They just don't want that. And that's the important thing to remember. The USA occupied Afghanistan for 20 years. And during that whole 20 years, Afghanistan did not get more stable because that was the point. Afghanistan borders Iran, Afghanistan borders China, and Afghanistan is just south of Russia. And under U.S. dominance, Afghanistan had all kinds of wild, crazy terrorist groups, and it had all kinds of poppy fields and drug gangs. And all of that instability, it flowed into Iran. One out of every 100 Iranians is addicted to heroin. Where does that heroin come from? Right over the border in Afghanistan. Russia has issues with foreign gangs bringing in heroin. China, and where has China had issues with radical Muslims? The Uyghur regions that border China, right? Where Iran, right? What's right next? The area of Iran that borders Afghanistan, they've had Sunni separatist groups. Iran's government is Shia. There are these Sunni terrorist groups there's one called Jindallah, that has been going over the border and trying to break away chunks of Iran. Jindallah operated in Afghanistan. And the USA occupied Afghanistan for 20 years to keep it unstable, to keep it in chaos. And that's what they're doing in Somalia. They want Somalia to be unstable because if a stable government were to emerge on the Horn of Africa, it would have too much power and it could choke off global trade. It would be a big problem. So keeping that area unstable, drone strikes, different warlords fighting each other, that's very, very, very essential to maintaining U.S. power. And that's what that's about, right? And, this is before 9/11, even the USA was in Somalia. Black Hawk Down, all of that. That area is very, very impoverished. And because they can't let anything stable emerge because it would threaten U.S. power. So there we go. All right. Next question from Kate Johnson. Have you ever read The Assassination of Julius Caesar by Michael Parenti? Have I ever read it? That book I am all about that book. Here it is. I have had this book since I was a senior in high school. I love this book. This is one of the best books I've ever read. I love it. I absolutely love it. I really, really love it. I absolutely love it. And the reason that I absolutely love it, I love it because Michael Parenti is an anti-imperialist, a communist or whatever. And he wrote this book on Italian history. He's very proud of his Italian heritage. He's even written an autobiography where he talks about being Italian, and he's very proud of his Italian heritage. And he wrote this book, and it won like crazy awards. Why? Because he's a well-respected academic, but all the other books he wrote were communist and like praised Milosevic and praised Stalin, so they couldn't give him awards for that. So when he wrote this book, they all unloaded all the awards on him because it's about Italian history, and there's no danger in giving him an award for writing this, right? Michael Parenti has had issues when he's tried to speak at different campuses. They'll ban him because of his writings on Yugoslavia. They say he's denying genocide and all this. But he wrote a book about ancient Italy, about Julius Caesar, and he got away with it. And so people could get away with giving him awards for it. It's a very good book. And it's what you call historiography. It's not simply history of ancient Rome. It's a critique of how we read the history of ancient Rome. I absolutely love this book. Yeah, it's one of my favorite books. Interesting story, though. One of my political mentors absolutely hated this book. It was published during the 2004 election cycle. He saw this book as nothing but campaign advertising for John Kerry, which I think is interesting. And maybe it was that, right? During 2004, a lot of people were really hoping that John Kerry would beat Bush. John Kerry was a military guy. And that, some people read this book as vote for John Kerry against Bush, right? I don't read it that way. The criticism of this book that generally gets made is that Julius Caesar was a colonizer. Julius Caesar owned a lot of slaves. Julius Caesar plundered Gaul and plundered Britain and all of that. And Michael Parenti makes him the good guy. Well, that's the point, though. That's the point. Yes, Julius Caesar was a leader of the Roman military that went around plundering the world, but for his own selfish reasons, he entered an alliance with the Roman proletariat. That's the point. It's about Bonapartism. Julius Caesar was a Bonapartist. That's the point, is that he, in the interest of imperialism, he developed a vision for making the Roman Empire more stable by developing the various city-states. And the more I've read this book over the years, it's much deeper, right? I used to read it as just, okay, Julius Caesar was like a Roosevelt. That's how, when I first read it. But I've revisited the book since then, and I realized it's much deeper than that. Julius Caesar had a vision for the Roman Empire that was a lot like the Belt and Road Initiative. He wanted all the other city-states that were part of the Roman Empire to become developed and eventually get voting power, right? He wanted to give citizenship in the Roman Senate to people in Alexandria, to people in Athens, to people in Corinth and other cities. And the idea was that all these other city-states would then have skin in the game of maintaining the Roman global system. He realized that for the Roman Empire to be sustainable, it couldn't be centered around one city. That's brilliant, right? He basically envisioned a multipolar Roman Empire because that was the only way it was sustainable. If all the wealth and tribute was going to one city and all the decision-making power was coming out of one city, Rome was doomed, right? And Julius Caesar was smart enough to realize that. And the other thing that he talks about, Julius Caesar wrote books. Julius Caesar was an intellectual. In Rome, to be a military leader, you had to be smart and you had to write. And Julius Caesar wrote big memoirs of his wars and big books and all that. And Julius Caesar was a Roman citizen who was very good at, leading armies and conquering people. And he basically realized that if Rome remained centered around one city, it was doomed in the long term. And he also realized that in order to gain power over the other wealthy Romans that didn't like him, what he should do is be a Bonapartist and build a mass movement of poor people, of proletarians, of Greeks and Jews to fight against the other Roman senators, and that Julius Caesar was a Bonapartist. It's actually a very, very insightful book. And you read this book, you'll understand how politics works. You'll understand Trump. You'll understand Bonapartism. I love this book. Yes. Have I read this book? You betcha. You betcha I've read this book, and I'm a huge fan. I'm a huge, huge fan of this book. It is I consider it essential reading. I'm all about it. So yes, Kate, I've read this book. I cite it, and We Are City Builders, the first CPI textbook. I quote it extensively. There's extensive quotations from this book. I give it credit and quote it in here. Yes, I've read it, and yes, I love it. I absolutely love this book. All right, next question. John McCarthy, and I got it twice, John. I hope that you didn't mean to send it twice. I hope it didn't charge you twice, but you sent the same question twice. Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity issued a warning to President Trump not to attack Venezuela. Great. I mean, that's Ray McGovern and his group. And they're saying that Russia and possibly even China would feel obligated to enhance military support in response to a missile, air, or drone strike on sovereign Venezuelan territory. Escalation would be inevitable. And this is a memorandum issued by the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. And they go on to say that the Tren de Aragua gang is not under Maduro's control. That's absurd. Great. I mean, they're right. And I really hope that the USA de-escalates because, an attack on Venezuela would be illegal. It would be against the interests of the country. There's a lot of important names on here. John Kiriakou, Bill Benny, Ray McGovern, Ann Wright. I remember Lieutenant Colonel Ann Wright. So, yeah, I certainly hope that they listen to the VIPs and they don't attack Venezuela. Thank you for sending that, John. And you sent it twice because it's important, I guess. And thank you. And, we've talked extensively about Venezuela on here. The idea that Venezuela is part of the drug trade, they're inconsequential in the drug trade. They really, really are. There we go. Now, Richard says, what are you supposed to say to people who praise and defend Rhodesia? That's an odd question to ask me, Richard. I think you probably know how I feel about that. Africans, or say that Africans and Muslims destroy societies and didn't have working societies before Europeans came because of Mugabe, or it can't govern because of Mugabe, and use this as a plug for Walter Rodney. Okay, well, there's 3 layers here. People who defend Rhodesia. Rhodesia was a genocidal slave state. All right. The African people in Rhodesia did not have human rights. They were second-class citizens. They worked as slave laborers on the land owned by the wealthy white farmers. It was apartheid, like in South Africa, and it was pretty bad, pretty shitty. And yeah, it was a big thing. Defend the white farmers of South Africa, or defend the white farmers of Rhodesia. It was a white supremacist cause. I believe the guy who killed Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., allegedly, right, James Earl Ray, many people say he's not the guy who actually pulled the trigger. Regardless, James Earl Ray was part of the Friends of Rhodesia clubs. A lot of white supremacists from around the world were going to Rhodesia to fight for Rhodesia. And Ian Smith was the big, like, millionaire landowner of Rhodesia. Ian Smith, I mean, it was, Rhodesia. It was the Rhodesian Bush War. And there was the Lancaster House Agreement, where Robert Mugabe took power, and the agreement was they wouldn't redistribute the property of the white farmers for like 10 years. And then that 10 years was up, and they waited some more. And then finally in the 90s, they started redistributing the land. And that's when suddenly U.S. media said Robert Mugabe is an evil dictator and a tyrant, and blah, 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 blah. Right? And actually, when Nelson Mandela, before he took power, I've seen news reports where Ted Koppel holds up Robert Mugabe as the good guy. And he says, now, Robert Mugabe, this is an African revolutionary who didn't redistribute land. And it's funny because now Nelson Mandela is remembered as a good guy, and Robert Mugabe is portrayed as a bad guy. But it used to be flipped. Robert Mugabe came to power first, didn't redistribute any land. And for a while, he was the good guy, and the African National Congress, the ANC, were portrayed as these bloodthirsty radicals. If they take power, South Africa will become the Cuba of Africa, and all of this. So it's actually pretty wild to see how they flipped. But Robert Mugabe, I mean, things in Zimbabwe for the white minority certainly got worse when Robert Mugabe came to power. And really, it didn't get worse until the 90s when they started redistributing the land, right? They didn't touch property. And even today, a lot of the government of Zimbabwe is actually white people. Did you know that? A lot of the people who work in the government offices, because education was not available. And now education, literacy and such is available. But during the time of Rhodesia, there was not access to education, literacy, and things like that. And so the people who do the accounting and the people who run the government offices in Rhodesia, or in former Rhodesia, Zimbabwe now, are white people, even now, right? And that's one thing that is kind of a little secret of Zimbabwe, that is that a lot of the government bureaucracy, even in the Marxist ruling party, the ZANU government, are white. There is a layer of white people that support ZANU and supported Mugabe and were part of his bureaucracy. And that's something you would never hear, because that just doesn't fit anybody's narrative. Doesn't fit Mugabe's narrative, doesn't fit the people who hate Mugabe's narrative, right? But yeah, under Mugabe, they redistributed land, and there were a lot of African people who really benefited from that. And the New York Times admitted that when they had the last time that Mugabe was elected, they were going to try and say it was a stolen election. But the New York Times interviewed people, a lot of those people, the African folks that were in the military, that got land, got their own farm, their income went up. They made money, right? And that there was, the USA put crazy sanctions on Zimbabwe, tried to crush their economy. But as China got stronger, they traded with China. They nationalized the diamond mines of Zimbabwe. That was an important move that Mugabe took before he died, was he nationalized the diamond mines. Also, when I was in Russia for the first time in 2017, I met people from Zimbabwe, and they talked about how one of the best things that happened was that, Zimbabwe is home to the world's largest waterfall, the Victoria Falls, right? It's the largest waterfall in the world. And people from all over the world go to Zimbabwe to see the Victoria Falls. So thanks to China, there's now a beautiful hotel facing the Victoria Falls. And so now when tourists go to Zimbabwe to see the Victoria Falls, they can stay in this fancy luxury hotel. And that brings in a lot of money, right? And that thanks to China, they've been able to utilize the fact that they have, they have this, this great natural wonder of the world, the Victoria Falls, that overall, for the majority of people in Zimbabwe, things got better under Robert Mugabe. Now, the USA tried to mess it up with sanctions, but overwhelmingly, Mugabe was good for the overwhelming majority of people in Zimbabwe. And that's not what you hear on TV. And I'm sure somebody you met here in America from Zimbabwe says it's awful and all of that. But the average person in Zimbabwe has a very positive opinion of Mugabe because he redistributed the land, he brought literacy, he nationalized the diamond mines. And is there corruption? Yes. And actually, at the end of his life, he was trying to make his wife a successor, and the military kind of removed him and forced him into an early retirement. And, and now, it's still the Marxist Party, the ZANU Party, the Zimbabwe African National Union Patriot Front Party that's still in power. But Mugabe, he wanted to kind of stay in power and put his wife as his successor. And they basically said, no, you can't do that. And then the U.S. media tried to portray it as if the anti-Mugabe forces were going to come to power. And that's not the case. Look, they used to lie about Mugabe all the time. Right? I remember this. Robert Mugabe, he was anti-gay, right? It's Africa, right? In Africa, anti-gay stuff is pretty normal. And Robert Mugabe, he's a good speaker, and he's kind of like a Huey Long figure who gives these long speeches. He made a lot of anti-gay jokes in his speeches. And in one of his speeches, he made a joke, which, I'm not going to defend this joke, right? It's not the kind of joke one would make in polite company in the United States. But he made a joke. He said something like, I will accept homosexuality if we can lock two men in a room and one of them gets pregnant, right? That was the joke he made. And of course the audience is laughing, ha, 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 right? Very funny. And then he said, but if they don't, I'll cut their heads off. And then everyone laughed at that too. Not a nice joke. That's a homophobic, crude joke. Okay. At one point in America, those kind of jokes were common too. Not a very nice thing to say. Okay, fine. However, it was reported in American media, Robert Mugabe calls for beheading gay people. That is not what he said, okay? He made a homophobic, nasty joke. He made a rude joke about gay people. Not a nice thing to do. He's an old man. He was like 80 years old. He's up in front of his audience riffing, and he's like, and we cut their heads off. Well, not funny, hateful, bigoted joke, not nice. But no, and it was reported all over U.S. media. I remember this. Obama was the president. Oh, in Zimbabwe, they're now going to cut off the heads of gay people. That is not true. That's not what happened. And it was just all over the U.S. media. And I just hate stuff like this. I really, really do. I really, really hate stuff like this, where if it's an anti-imperialist country, you can just make shit up, right? You can just completely distort the truth. And when I was in college, right, I remember when Hugo Chavez had a constitutional referendum to amend the Constitution of Venezuela to get rid of term limits. And every class I was in, even classes that had nothing to do with world politics, I took public speaking and communications. Oh, and today in Venezuela, they're voting on whether or not Hugo Chavez is president for life. And I would raise my hand. No, they're voting on not having term limits. Well, yeah, but then he's the president for life. Well, they don't have term limits in Japan. They don't have term limits in China, or in Britain. They don't have time. Many countries don't have term limits. Well, yeah, but everyone knows the Venezuelan elections are rigged. That's funny. Jimmy Carter and the Carter Center said they're not rigged, and it would be like, you would point out, no, they're not voting on whether Hugo Chavez is president for life. They're voting on whether or not to have term limits, right? And no one cares. It's like, you're defending that dictator, Hugo Chavez? No, I'm defending truth, you fucking idiot. And no, and again, the same thing. Robert Mugabe said to cut off the heads of gay people. No, he didn't. He made a nasty joke at one of his rallies. Okay? Are you defending that dictator? I'm defending truth. Some things are true and some things are not. Robert Mugabe did not call for executing gay people. He made a nasty joke. Like, and it makes me mad how they lie like this. They just lie. They just lie. Right? It's infuriating to me. You know, the person who asked the question said, "What would you say to people that defend Rhodesia?" Well, I mean, first of all, like Rhodesia is how many decades old? Like, you know, you might as well defend ancient Rome. Maybe you can, you know, defend, I don't know, defend Charlemagne or something. I mean, it's like Rhodesia is gone. Okay, so you talk about a lost cause. You know, I mean, that's like Confederate War reenacting at this point. But on top of that, like, what I don't understand is that a lot of these kind of people, these like white nationalist types who would defend Rhodesia, they think somehow the US government supports Mugabe. And it's like, no, they don't. The USA put crazy sanctions on Mugabe, tried to overthrow Mugabe. No, they don't. Well, yeah, but in America, they say racism is bad. And so that's Mugabe. It's like, no, they don't. The US government was fine with Mugabe until he started redistributing property. And then they opposed him and tried to overthrow him. And the British government set up a special fund for, you know, a special fund, a charity to like give money to all the white farmers who lost their land and all this. And it's like the white nationalist crowd, they're against Israel. Okay. I mean, that's, you know, something where they're, you know, at least understanding one thing, but they have it in their head that anyone in the world who is, you know, that there's like a big conspiracy against white colonialism. I don't know where they get this from. Right. The US government hated Mugabe, tried to overthrow him like you wouldn't believe. Israel was trying to overthrow Mugabe. But somehow, because Robert Mugabe is against racism, he's part of the massive conspiracy against the white man or some shit. White nationalists are very stupid. Okay. They really are. I mean, the problem is, I think there wouldn't be as many white nationalists there as there are now if wokeism, I mean, you're basically not allowed to be a socialist nowadays, right? If you get interested in communism and socialism, you learn that to be a communist and a socialist means you're never allowed to talk about economics. You just go around calling people racist all day. And so people that are genuinely interested in economics say, oh, I guess I'm going to be a white nationalist. And that doesn't make any sense to me. But you know, I got interested in all of this because I was a kid. I was taught communism just never worked anywhere. All it leads to is people starving and being miserable and dying and all of this. And so I learned basic economics and that's not true. And then I spent my adult life in communist groups realizing none of the communist groups give a shit about economics. None of them care about socialism working. None of them care about central planning. Being a communist in America is going around pointing at people and calling them racist, sexist, and homophobic. That's basically what leftism in America is reduced to. It means I hate the American people. I think they're all a bunch of bloodthirsty racists, and I'm going to virtue signal by pointing at them. And that's why leftism in America is doomed. And it wasn't that obvious when I was a kid. When I was a kid, you know, woke hadn't really happened yet. So, you know, but nowadays, if you're a young person growing up in, you know, Texas, and if you're a young white person, I should say, growing up in Texas or Idaho or Alabama, and you're interested in economics, you would never, and you're like, why is the conditions in the country shit? You would never become a leftist because the response to the left is, oh, you deserve it. You're white. America's an evil country. You know, so of course they go to the right, right? And the right talks about quote unquote economic nationalism, you know, and then the economic devastation. Right. They have this whole thing about white genocide and all that. So if you care about economics and you're a young white person, you become right wing, right? Because they're the only people that talk about that. And if you talk about economics, like me, I mean, my anti-racist credentials are a mile long. You can read literal articles. You know, I wrote articles for Mint Press News defending Robert Mugabe. Right. I wrote a long article called Mugabe, a Dictator, talking about how he was not a dictator. I was pro Mugabe, but somehow I'm a white supremacist because I talk about economics. Right. And it's just common knowledge. Oh, Caleb's actually a Nazi pretending to be a communist. How am I that? I'm not that. I'm obviously not that. I've literally videotaped women that were assaulted, black women assaulted by the police, got them acquitted in juvenile court in 2010. How am I a white nationalist? Right. But it's just, oh, he must be because I talk about economics, and you're not allowed to do that. Leftism is not about economics. Economics is like fascist, man. So the left has gotten to be so cringe that a lot of young people that are like, how can we make economic conditions better in our country? The only people that have those conversations are people on the right, and it gets mixed up in all this white supremacist crap, right? And so, yeah, a lot of these people, right, they're against globalism. right? They call imperialism globalism. They're against it. They're against Israel. Good for them. But then they go to the left, and the left, it's supposed to be socialist and communist, does not give a shit about socialist economics or communism or anti-imperialism. All they do is point fingers, racist, racist, racist. I'm mad at my mom and dad. No one, it's just a shrill identity politics trauma thing. That's what left has been reduced to. It's just a bunch of people screaming about their trauma and pointing fingers and calling people racist. And it's a mess. The left is a mess. And the right, the right is there, and, they take issues that should, by definition, be leftist issues. Why is the economy of the Midwest devastated? That's a leftist issue. Globalization, tendency of the falling rate of profit, but no one on the left talks about that, right? They take issues that should be leftist issues, and they take them in a disgusting white identity direction. So, yeah, but like, the issue there with like people that defend Rhodesia, you talk to these people, they literally believe that somehow Israel and the US government are supporting Mugabe and supported Mugabe. They clearly did not. Mugabe redistributed land, from the white farmers to the African people. They have the Chinese yen. His personal security guards were North Koreans. I mean, the US government and Israel did not support Mugabe, but white nationalists think that because racism good, black people part of the conspiracy. And it's just, I don't know, whatever, I don't know. I mean, but anyway, people who say Africans and Muslims destroy societies. I mean, and Walter Rodney. Yeah, Walter Rodney wrote a very important book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. The idea that people of color can't have civilization. I mean, the Aztecs had built the Roman Empire in Mexico, right? If you look at Mexico, when Cortez showed up, it was the Roman Empire. Slavery, human sacrifices. Instead of the Colosseum, they had, the pyramid where they did the human sacrifices. They had a city-state that's now Mexico City, Tenochtitlan. I mean, yeah, people of color can build civilizations. Timbuktu was a city-state long before Rome, before Greece. You had Timbuktu. I mean, human civilization started in Africa. I mean, that's just, there's a lot about why did Europe have the Renaissance when it did? Why, right? What was going on there? And that's there's a lot written about that. But the idea that, I mean, China invented paper money. China invented the first civil service examination. Confucius was writing amazing stuff. I mean, Chinese civilization predates European civilization by a lot. Marco Polo was bringing the achievements of Chinese civilization to the West. Yes, yeah. People who claim that are wrong. All right, next. And then Richard sent another question. It was supposed to be praise for Walter Rodney and his amazing work. Yeah, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa is a very, very good book, right? It's a great book about how, that European imperialism and colonialism destroyed and prevented, and that is a really big hole in leftism. Okay. For example, all the things that we associate as quote unquote backward about the Muslim world, right? Like, beheadings, stonings, all of that are all in the countries the USA supports, like Saudi Arabia. And the countries the USA has tried to overthrow in the Middle East, like Iraq, like Syria, like Libya, were all the most modern and advanced countries. When the British went to India, what did they do? They saw the people in India with the caste system, and they said, oh boy, this caste system is primitive. We're going to make you have human rights and treat all your people equally. Bullshit. No, when the British Empire went to India, they reinforced the caste system because the caste system was this primitive mechanism that kept India from developing. It was and who got rid of the caste system? It was Gandhi, and it was the people that modernized, the people aligned with the Soviet Union, right? The governments in India that were aligned with the Soviet Union fought against the caste system, right? So, it's like this idea that imperialism modernizes countries. This is something a lot of leftists believe. A lot of leftists believe this. They believe imperialism modernizes countries and makes them more modern, and that's bad. Bullshit. Imperialism keeps countries impoverished. It keeps primitive, backward relations intact in order to keep countries under the gun. There's many examples of that, right? I mean, who does the USA back against China? The Dalai Lama. Tibet under the Dalai Lama was a feudal society where the people were slaves, where the monks lived in luxury and the majority were serfs, right? That imperialism goes around the world and backs up the most primitive barbaric forces, and the people who fight the imperialists are the ones that bring human rights. Iran has women generals in the military. There are more women in the Iranian parliament by percentage than there are women in the US Congress. Iran, yes, it's an Islamic republic. Yes, it's conservative, but in a lot of areas, they're way ahead of Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Oman and the countries aligned with the United States, right? And this notion that imperialism is forcing these primitive people with their primitive ways to adopt our Western enlightened ways. No, 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 no. Imperialism is keeping countries underdeveloped so that they can be impoverished captive markets for Wall Street. Imperialism is about holding back development. I cannot repeat this enough. Imperialism is about holding back development. I'm going to say it one more time. Imperialism is about holding back development. I'll say it another time. Imperialism is about holding back development. That's what imperialism is. And that people don't understand this. They think imperialism is bringing development, and that's bad. Wrong, wrong, wrong. It's not Avatar. The movie Avatar, the movie Dances with Wolves, that's a bunch of crap, all right? It's not Avatar, right? And the Hollywood narrative of what imperialism is, where the beautiful indigenous people with their beautiful ways are corrupted by the evil white man who brings electricity and crushes their beautiful indigenous songs of peace. That's not what imperialism is about. Imperialism is about economics, right? I cannot tell you how much Selma Hayek made this awful movie called Beatrice at Dinner, and I wanted to puke. I wanted to completely puke. It's this movie starring Selma Hayek, where Selma Hayek is this beautiful indigenous woman who does beautiful indigenous magic and cured this wealthy California family of disease. And then John Lithgow plays an evil capitalist who went to her country and started building and built roads and built highways and was destroying nature. And I watched this movie and it's like, this is crap, right? And at one point, the John Lithgow is supposed to be Donald Trump, right? He's supposed to be the evil right-wing capitalist. He's supposed to be Trump. And he's smoking his cigar. And John Lithgow says, I don't like those Wall Street guys that make money from money. I'm about building. And Selma Hayek is this, I love nature and I'm indigenous. And it's like, that's not what imperialism is about. Evo Morales, the socialist leader of Bolivia, what did he do? He built roads everywhere. You go to Nicaragua, what have they done? They've electrified the whole country. Anti-imperialist governments build. China's building with the Belt and Road Initiative. And these people, this avatar narrative of imperialism, they don't understand what it's about. Imperialism is about reinforcing the most primitive, backward ways. It's about preventing electrification, preventing industrialization. And it's Russia and China and Iran and Nicaragua. They're the ones that build and modernize and bring education and all of that. And that's what the imperialists are trying to crush. And that's why the imperialists have churned out a bunch of Hollywood movies about Avatar and that's why they've made leftism anti-development. And that's why George Soros and the Ford Foundation give lots of money to hippie leftists who are against development. Every time Evo Morales would come to the United Nations, Evo Morales, the great socialist president of Bolivia, every time he would come, there would be a crowd of Native American people who don't believe in electricity that would protest against him. And who was paying for them to do that? Who was paying for them to do that? Were they just there? They don't believe in electricity. Somehow they got on planes and found their way all the way to the United States to protest against Evo Morales, to beat on drums and say, we don't believe in roads. It's against the beautiful Native American way. What's going on there? Come on, folks. Come on. During the Nicaragua Contra War, the Mosquito Coast, the CIA funded indigenous groups to fight against the Sandinistas and actually arranged for them to be killed. They were trying to set up for them to be massacred so they could make propaganda against the Sandinistas about it. I mean, it's really awful what they were doing. It was like they wanted there to be a massacre of indigenous people so they could make propaganda aimed at leftists who would support the Sandinistas. to get them to support the Contras. I mean, it's so many examples of this, and the left does not understand imperialism at all, and they're watching Fern Gully and Avatar, and they don't get it. Anyway, I hope that was a long way of answering your questions. Well, I promised Phil that I would play Phil's favorite song, the China song, so I'm going to put the China song on. Before I do that, if anyone else has got any more questions, the best way to send your questions is buy me a coffee. I think there might be some questions on Rumble. I think there's some Rumble rants that have come in, so I'll answer those. Yeah, I think, oh, there you go. I guess Penny sent a Rumble rant. Maduro famous. She sent it 3 times. I've got it on here 3 times. I hope you didn't mean to send it 3 times. I'll put Maduro famous on, I'll put that on after. But yeah, if anyone has any more questions, you can send your questions via Rumble Rants. You can cash at me at CalebMoppin22. But the best way to send questions is buy me a coffee. Buy me a coffee is the best way to send your questions. So buy me a coffee. That'll be good. And now I will put on Phil's favorite song, the China anthem from Prairie Fire. I'll put that on. This is a song. The Prairie Fire was a rock and roll folk band, a folk rock band that was aligned with the Revolutionary Communist Party. 1976, they cut an album called Break the Chains, and one of the songs on there was about a group of American communists who visited China during the Mao era. It's called New China. It's kind of a moving song. So we'll put that on. Then I'll answer. We'll do Penny's thing about Maduro, and then we'll answer any other questions that come in, and then we'll call it a night. But yeah, I'm having fun with you all. You all are great. Let's do it.
Got to the border, we began to walk under 2 flags flying over the bridge we were to cross. One was the bloody British rag of imperialism, casting its shadow over poverty, starvation, vicious exploitation in Hong Kong. The other was the flaming red flag of revolution and socialism, telling us all, people of the world, the time has come to come along. This ain't just any old border that we are standing on. It stands between 2 systems, one dying, one young and strong. And then we crossed that bridge into China, saw a great banner up ahead. Its meaning set my heart a pounding, and this is what that banner is. Long live the great unity of the peoples of the world. Long live the great unity of the peoples of the world. Went to a steel mill, saw people working hard, but there were no bosses. The workers ran the job. They worked 10 hours, 6 days a week, on great machines built by their own hand. They labored not for some rich man's profits, but to meet the needs of people of the land. And they are building with such a spirit of revolution and socialism, for they are masters of their own future. The working class is in command. Talked with an older worker. He said many worries are gone. If one is sick or injured, they are provided for. We have no fear of rising prices, no unemployment will you find. There's always more to be done to build China, not just for us, but to free mankind. Long live the People's Republic. Long live working class rule. Long live the People's Republic. Long live working class rule. We arrived in Shanghai, where before it was free. Dope and prostitution and starving people filled the streets. And now these people stand up united, providing for the needs of all. Decent housing, health care, education, they decide now they are the law. And man, I felt so damn proud of China, of revolution and socialism. Just look at what our class has accomplished. Just look at what the struggle has won. We talked with men and women, now working side by side, about our many struggles for freedom so long denied. They said, comrades, China is with you. This is your country as well as ours. The struggles of the people united will be triumphant. We have the power. Long live the great unity, yeah, of the peoples of the world. Long live the great unity, yeah, of the peoples of the world. You know, I miss my family, wish they were there with me. I knew they're back home struggling to change society. And I admit I hated to leave China. You know that freedom kinda grows on you. But now I feel such deep determination to do the job we all have to do. Remember, people, our day's coming. Make revolution, build socialism, to do away with class exploitation, to end oppression once and for all. And I have learned a lesson that I will always heed. The fight to end oppression, the working class must lead. But we will build us up a great movement to sweep away the system we're in. And nothing gonna stop us from doing it. We will fight and we will win. Long live the People's Republic. Long live working class rule. Long live the People's Republic. Long live working class rule.
Hope you liked it, Phil. Hope you liked it. That was for Phil. Hope you're still up, Phil, and enjoying the song. All right. Now Penny, she sent in a Rumble rant about Nicolas Maduro is famous, and this is, I guess, a clip of Nicolas Maduro. So here we go.
De Venezuela y el cuarto Congreso de la Juventud del Partido Socialista Unido de Venezuela, con la intervención del presidente Nicolás Maduro, que ha dado el salto cualitativo para que las 260 Socialista Unido de Venezuela y el cuarto Congreso de la Juventud del Partido Socialista Unido de Venezuela, con la intervención del presidente Nicolás Maduro, que ha dado el salto cualitativo para que las 260...
De ver mi foto, yo todavía me asombro, de ver mi foto y mi imagen en Fox News, CNN, y digo, coño, ¿hasta dónde llegaste, Nico? ¿Ah? ¿Qué temen de mí? Si no soy yo, es un pueblo de pie, en batalla, bolivariano, chavista, dueño de su destino, que no será humillado jamás, que no será rendido jamás y que logrará vencer al imperialismo en cualquiera de las amenazas que intente contra nuestra patria amada. Es que de verdad uno no debe sorprenderse. Y digo, coño, soy famoso. Soy más famoso que Taylor Swift en Estados Unidos ahorita. Que Karol G. Soy más famoso que Bad Bunny.
Well, there you go. That was certainly amusing. Hey, dare to struggle, dare to win. Stay strong. You know, I am with the Bolivarian Revolution, and the USA better leave them alone. I really hope this stupid provocation and these extrajudicial killings in the waters of the Caribbean end. Long live the Bolivarian Revolution. Yeah. So there we go. All right, and I don't see any other questions, and that's okay because it's 11:30. You know, we've been going for about 2.5 hours here. So just another reminder that if you're on the East Coast or if you just, if you're anywhere, please join us in New Jersey on January 11th. It's going to be a great event, great chance to meet other people from our community and even other guests and friends from Yahoo, guests and friends from different political groups we've worked with, religious communities and stuff. It's going to be a great, great day in New Jersey. Full buffet, food buffet, and it's all of that. So register and join us on January 11th. The Earth is Awakening. America should join. It's going to be an epic political event, a whole day, 2 p.m. to 9 p.m. in New Jersey, near the Newark airport. So yeah, go ahead and register and be there. We're getting registrations. People are registering. People are joining CPI. New memberships are pouring in. I'm actually blown away. I mean, it's great. Good things are happening. We're the real deal. CPI is the real deal. We're the real deal, and we don't need to think about anybody else. I do apologize. I privated last night's stream because I didn't want to, I got a little negative towards the end. I don't want to do that. We don't need to think about any of these other people. We're doing our own thing. We're doing our own thing, and memberships are pouring in, and we're carrying out operations and working hard, and we got a really good group of folks. And so dare to struggle, dare to win. Long live the Center for Political Innovation. Great things are happening. Yeah, thank you all for being here night after night. I'll be back tomorrow night. Saturday night is always a really big night for streaming. Remember, if you have a question you want me to answer, you can send it in if you're watching this later, right? You can buy me a coffee, right? It doesn't have to be while I'm live, and I'll just do it on the next stream. Kate sent her questions before I even started. So buy me a coffee, send your questions in. We'll be back tomorrow night. Yeah, everyone who's working hard, getting those palm cards and leaflets out at the food banks, everyone who's doing outreach, hands off Venezuela, everybody who is having Khrushchevism study groups like they're doing out in LA and in Minneapolis. And yeah, our organization is solid as a rock. We are solid as a rock. Dare to struggle, dare to win. Long live innovationism. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.